Good afternoon. I think we're live. I expect we'll have some more folks coming in. I hope this doesn't mean that they're so busy still trying to make money they're not interested in learning how to give it away. But I'm Bill Janeway, as was previously disclosed. And with me we have I think it's a very interestingly diverse group of people who are engaged in the practice of philanthropy. Kamran of Global Catalyst Partners, Suzanne, who has been with Salesforce.com and is, in a sense, a corporate philanthropic arm, and Peter, who's head of the X Prize Foundation, which is, I think, a kind of unique approach. I do think it was interesting that on Tuesday of this week, the Financial Times had a big article on the death and rebirth of venture philanthropy. I don't know if you all had a chance to look at it, but it was kind of this notion 10 years ago, coming out of the valley in the time of the bubble, enormous wealth, and people are going to approach philanthropic projects like venture capitalists. We're going to tell them what to do and tell them how to do it, and if they don't do it right, we'll fire them and start again. And we kind of have come through that cycle, but I certainly detect in my own activities a degree of professionalism and a degree of discipline that may not always have been the case. But with that, why don't we start with you, Kamran, and tell us a little bit about, sort of the shape and strategy that you and your foundation have been pursuing, and then we'll move along.
Good morning, or good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all. Before I start, I wanted to make an announcement from Mark that tomorrow there will be a contest for all the people wearing shorts. So please remember to come along on that. We'll all vote for the best looking pair of legs. So. One thing I can say about what has really motivated me about philanthropy and what I have learned on that. Where I came from, I was a high-tech entrepreneur and really knew nothing about philanthropy and how to get involved in a charity organization. I had a feel that there is a lot that should be done, and I was quite blessed that in my third company I was fired as a company called Momenta, and I had a year in my hand to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and I took that year to travel around the world. And as I did some of my studying of other religions, cultures, I found out people were all the same, and I said that why not come and combine that knowledge into a philosophy of life, that when I'm starting a new company, I should look into developing companies, technologies that help bring people closer together, and also help to create companies that are only looking into being global players and use the money that we invest in these companies to create global companies from get-go, so that they would have branches in different countries and use business as a way to bring people closer together. And the third principle that was very clear to me was that I really did not need any more money, because if you put your greed aside, when you have had one or two successes in the business, how many hamburgers can you eat? You look at my belly, you say probably quite a few, but honest, you go and buy a nice home, you buy a nice car, what do you want to do with the rest of your money? And why not give all of the money from that point on for philanthropy? So that was kind of the motivation I saw as a way to really make my for-profit investments with philanthropy in mind and social change in mind, and make all of the money that comes in go to our foundations to do this work. And it was a really difficult learning path, because in 1996, I knew very little, and as we made many, many mistakes I don't know how much you want me to go around right now, but
Kamran, let's circle back and go around. Suzanne, tell us a little bit about the strategy that you bring from Salesforce to philanthropy.
Yeah, so one of the things we're seeing and one of the things that we're trying to help catalyze is a very different mindset for philanthropy from the corporate sector. And what I mean by that is doing it very, very early on. The myth we're trying to debunk is that you have to wait till you've reached a certain level of comfortable success until you can give back to the community. So I started the Salesforce Foundation going on 8 years ago.
Really?
The company was only 50 people at that time.
I was just going to say, it wasn't exactly a force.
That's right. In our minds, it was, and in our hearts.
Well, in your leader's mind, it always was.
That's right. So, we put a % of our equity aside into a 501c3. We gave all of our employees 6 paid days, 1% of time. We call it the 1-1-1 model. And we give 1% of our product. So we have 2,500 nonprofits using Salesforce.com in a donated way to manage fundraising, volunteer management, et cetera. So I had the opportunity to go down to many, many startups. Since in the last 8 years, one of small startup called Google, who also took a % of their equity pre-IPO. So we, on the day of our IPO, went from 0 to about 18 million in assets. Today it's much bigger. Google, on the day of their IPO, 0 to $1 billion in a day. So we didn't invent it, we learned it from eBay. But what we're trying to do is not only the equity piece, which is huge leverage, but really look at what are all the assets of our company and how can we put them together, integrate them, and create social change. So we actually think of the company, even though we're an on-demand software provider, as really a social entrepreneur organization. So we work both with the nonprofit sector and the for-profit sector to try to catalyze some of this change.
Right, very good. Peter, you tell us, everybody knows something about the X Prize Foundation, but probably not as much, and probably some of what we think we know, we read on the internet, so we know it's not true. So give us the framework.
Sure. I guess the origin of the X Prize was me as a passionate 9-year-old child wanting to go to space and becoming absolutely frustrated with the fact that over 40 years the cost of spaceflight had gone up and the reliability had gone down and it wasn't happening. And learning a little bit about prizes and finding out that Lindbergh actually crossed the Atlantic to win a $25,000 prize. Right. And amazingly, all of the likely winners failed, and Ortega, who put up the money, automatically backed the winner. And it was something like 16 times the $25,000 prize was spent by the team. So what an amazing thing. You have almost fixed price engineering or science or breakthrough. Wanting to spark this industry, in a very difficult, long story, raised a $10 million purse. And we had 26 teams from 7 countries who spent $100 million to win the $10 million prize. And miraculously it worked again.
That's good leverage.
It's very good leverage. And we had 5.5 billion media impressions. So when I went and spoke to all the CEOs of these companies saying, put your name behind it. It's too crazy, it will never work, people will die, why isn't NASA doing it? And the fact of the matter is, it would have been a great investment. The Ansari family, Anusha, who was born in Persia, came to the US for her own passion, put it up. And Spaceship One is hanging there in Space Museum. Yep. But for me, it's about a different type of philanthropy. And it's something I think most foundations can consider as part of their portfolio. If you really want to cause a breakthrough, if you put up a prize, it's very efficient because you pay only when it's won. And it's highly leveraged because you'll typically get 10 to 50 times the prize amount spent to try and win your prize.
Yeah, that is a very, very interesting story. I want to shift gears a little bit by talking about how each of us, the experience we've had in working with established institutions. So in my case, I'm very much involved with Cambridge University, which we have decided was established 798 years ago. So we're raising the first endowment campaign for Cambridge since Henry VIII knocked off the monasteries. And it's £1 billion, and nobody's done that in Britain before. And on the other hand, my wife is very much involved with the Jackson Laboratory in Bar Harbor, Maine, which is the home of mouse genetics. And as an aside, I should tell you, is there anybody here who's never heard of Stuart Little? Okay, everybody's heard of Stuart Little. Stuart Little was a mouse. Well, the original founder and head of the Jackson Laboratory was Dr. C.C. Little, and Dr. Little had a mouse, and his great friend and neighbor wrote a book about it. But in each case, I mean, the Jackson Lab has been there for 80 years. Cambridge has been there for 800 years. My wife and I have each found that by taking the process seriously, of being able to enter into a conversation with the professionals, a conversation, not here's my, you get this if, but a conversation about priorities and strategic direction is possible to engage in a way that is deeply rewarding and continuously learning more and more about why it is interesting and worthwhile being involved. I think we all knew that, back 10 years ago, there was a certain kind of arrogance. I remember when, the great financier Mike Milken was designing the protocols that the doctors, the clinical researchers were going to follow to pursue the disease that he was interested in. But I'd be interested in how you talk about your experience, where you have come in as a philanthropist to some established organization, and you're bringing money, and how has the relationship worked? Have you found an openness, or is it, potentially contentious, us and them? Kamran, why don't you talk about that first?
From my situation, actually, I decided to start our own foundation because nobody was doing what I wanted to do at that time. We created a foundation called Schools Online, and our goal was to really use the internet as a vehicle to get the children in schools all over the world to communicate with each other and learn each other's cultures and religions before their local religious, potentially zealot religious leader would say, so-and-so religion is bad or so-and-so culture is wrong. They would, if they have had a chance to experience and develop some tolerance or accept diversity or celebrate diversity of other cultures, other religions, then maybe the next generation would not have so many wars that we have had. So that was the genesis of that, and we didn't see anything like that because in 1996, very few places had access to internet, let alone the schools. So between 96 and 2000, we worked with 5,000 schools in disadvantaged parts of the United States. 187 of the schools were in Indian reservations. 2,500 of schools were in Appalachia, and about over 1,000 were in disadvantaged parts of the major cities. In 2000, we said that more than 90% of American schools by that time had access to internet, so we didn't need to donate computers to them or hook them up to internet. We went international, and as you might know, we all have looked at the American culture being one of the most philanthropic cultures, as mentioned there. Unfortunately, 92% of our philanthropy goes only within the United States. It's less than 8% that goes internationally. And we decided to cease our activities for US and really go and learn about the philanthropy in the world. And that required another set of learning practices and making mistakes and going through the things.
Well, that I underline that, this process of learning by doing, trial and error, working on what works, and not assuming that just because you've been a successful businessman, therefore you've earned the right to tell people what to do.
Exactly. And this is a very, very key issue, because one of the worst things you could do is go to a new country and say, look, my credentials are I'm a successful entrepreneur from Silicon Valley. I know what all your problems are, and here is take 10 computers and 5 printers, and I let you have all your problems solved. That's the worst thing you could do in any country, and it really required us to go through a lot of trial and error. But through the process, we learned a lot, and we kept improving it. And a big issue came up actually in 2003. We formed a relationship with Relief International, and then we merged the two organizations together. And that actually allowed us to go to the next step, so that we had the capacity to build the school, to build a clinic, to build the infrastructure if it didn't exist. And as a result of that, now the combination Relief International Schools Online, We have activities in 16 countries instead of before we were at 36, but we have a lot of depth.
Yeah, much deeper.
600 people, all 90% of those 600 people work in that country, versus before we were all centralized, and every time we would send somebody to Tanzania, we would send somebody to Tajikistan, we had to go, incur a lot of expenses. And you know, when Americans travel in any of these developing countries, they go and they think that, you know, if you don't stay in Four Seasons and you stay in Hilton, that is downgrading your standards. When you hire people, and this is not a thing, I mean, I do the same thing, you know, for me to make a sacrifice is I don't stay at the Four Seasons.
You're going to have to make a sacrifice now because Suzanne's
Sorry,
I've got to ask Suzanne, do you find with you and your colleagues, you know, the style of how you are dealing with people, both internally and externally in the places you're funding, is that different from the style of building a very successful new kind of software company?
Well, it kind of goes back to your institution question, and I'll just tell you a quick story and then talk a little bit about this kind of integrated model. So looking at how do you work with large, old institutions, and we were in the business, as you know, of putting computers in schools, technology centers after school.
We did projects together.
That's right. In the beginning, 8 years ago. And we did it over the summer in the San Francisco Unified School District. We had 8 schools that we were bringing in, and we had really hard time. We were giving millions of dollars of equipment. We had Cisco at the table. We had Gateway, a whole bunch of corporate partners there, and nobody would show up. So we accidentally drilled into asbestos one day. And what do you know, lo and behold, the next day, everybody showed up at the meeting. And I thought, you know, this is really backwards. You know, we're giving millions of dollars of equipment. We make a mistake. All of a sudden, we bring everybody to the table. So what do we need to be doing differently? That was a big mistake we learned in the beginning about just sort of saying, okay, we pick you. We're now, you know, funding your organization. So now it's competitive. We actually do some prize-based work. But it's really interesting because you used to kind of write a check and throw it over the wall. And a lot of nonprofits and a lot of older institutions actually like that model a lot. But we don't work with nonprofits in that way anymore. And it came to us when Fast Company did, every year they do a social capitalist award. And when we were looking at the people who got that award, we thought, wow, 70% of these people are actually powered by Salesforce. They're using our product to really, you know, power their institution. So what if we shift our funding to fund those organizations and put our people behind them? And it's a much more successful model. So we very rarely now will go in to an organization, in fact, never, with just a check. So we really intentionally work with organizations and say, these are all the assets we can bring to the table. And we will, you know, we intend to bring to the table because we can make a much deeper impact with you if you'll kind of let us in the door. And a lot of, especially social entrepreneurs, but even some of the older institutions are beginning to see the power of not just throwing the check over the window, but actually bringing in, you know, software designers, technology people, marketing people, finance people to actually help them with their whole business as well.
Right. Very interesting. Peter, the X Prize goes on, right?
It does.
There's a new one. Tell us about the kind of, the process of conceiving what the next one would be and how you imagine the one after that will be.
Sure. So we're on schedule right now to launch somewhere between $250 to $500 million of prizes over the next 5 years.
Wow.
We'll be launching about 2 to 3 prizes per year. We launched our second prize with Craig Venters on our board for rapid gene sequencing, the Archon X Prize.
Right.
It's the first team to sequence 100 human genomes in 10 days. We'll be launching
starting with Craig Venters' genome, right?
Craig's been there, but we have something called the Genome 100. I won't go into that. It includes Stephen Hawking and a few other folks, but we are getting ready by end of this year to launch an automotive X Prize for a new generation of cars that exceed 100 miles per gallon with low carbon emissions that look good. It's not one car. We want a whole generation of cars brought to market and changing the paradigm.
Now, what's the process? Who's involved in defining what the target should be?
If I could, we have 4 different verticals that we're looking at. It's energy and environment. We're looking at a suite of prizes around the production, storage, and transmission of energy. Life sciences, we haven't announced this publicly, but we've just have an agreement with Lance Armstrong looking at a very large cancer X Prize to try and drive breakthroughs there. We have exploration, which is space and ocean, And then social, we're looking at actually in education and global entrepreneurship. I mean, we're looking for industries that are stuck. Places that have been around, and we have their unions or industrial complexes, whatever, that they have a supersaturated solution waiting for something to disrupt them. And when you put up a large enough cash prize with clear rules, you elevate a problem. You say, I don't care where you're from, what your background is, you know, where you got to school. If you solve this problem, you win. Go directly to go. It's not like a, you know, Nobel and all the prizes are great, but they reward somebody for work done 30 years ago. This is trying to really take the grand challenges we have. And we have a board and a group called our Vision Circle. Larry Page kicked it off, and we have a number of folks from Google and the Templeton Foundation, others. It's our brain trust, if you would, who help underwrite us. And we say, where are the big challenges? Where should we create a prize? And that's how we're going forward.
One thing I like to say about Peter's organization, if you haven't been involved in any of their events, I highly encourage you to go. There's so much energy there, and lots of great brains really come, totally getting excited. And had the privilege of being in one of them, when was it, a couple of months back on Google campus. It just, the level of energy in that room was just unbelievable.
You know, one of the things that, and we're going to be, this is sort of moving us towards winding up, but one thing that strikes me, of course, and particularly, Peter, the kind of prizes and targets that you've, there's this kind of dialectic between, you know, right, Lindbergh went for a private sector generated prize. On the other hand, of course, there's the great story of Longitude. Well, there was a prize there, but it was from the British Admiralty. Then on the other hand, you know, when I was perhaps I guess, a little bit older than you were, rather older than you were when you were frustrated about space, it was Jack Kennedy, not the founder of an entrepreneurial company, who said, we're going to go to the moon in 10 years. There's this kind of back and forth with government. And then clearly there's a sense that in some circles that government's the problem, private philanthropy is the answer. You know, my experience has been, and there's been a lot of this discussion, by the way, in Britain around the universities. There's a certain saying of people saying, you know, if we're going to raise a lot of money, we should go private. We should privatize Cambridge University. So I explained quietly that, you know, Princeton, private university, gets more than 50% of its budget from the federal government. There is no such thing as a private world-class research university anywhere in the world. But I'd be interested, maybe start with Peter and work back, about how you think about partnering with or balancing with, whether it's federal, state, or local, and of course with the schools, depending on which country you're in, it can be any one or all three of those.
So here's the issue. We are killing ourselves in this nation by how risk adverse we've gotten. It's ridiculous. And the problem is that the day before you have something that's a breakthrough, that's truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. So how do we, through the NIH or NSF or NASA, ever have a breakthrough? We are stuck to this incrementalism that's killing us. So, you know, cancer moves slowly along. The space program, forget about it. So we don't have the ability in the government and large corporations to really take risk because it requires failing half the time. And that either drops your stock price or it hits a congressional investigation and you're stuck. So I see prizes as a tool. It's not a panacea, but it's a way of taking sort of off-balance sheet risk for these large organizations.
That's a very good point. Suzanne, what's your experience and frustration?
I think you actually have to work hand in hand with government. I mean, we do some projects with the United Nations, the World Food Program in particular. And if we can help the government be more efficient through the tools that we provide, we're happy to do that because, you know, they have deeper pockets in certain areas than we do. So if we can help through efficiencies, I think it's really important. And it's particularly interesting in the international scale. So when I first went to Tokyo, just as one small country example, in 1999, I met with the Philanthropy Association there, and there was maybe 50 members at the time. Socialized government, for the most part, thinking that they would actually solve. Government's job was to solve social problems. Well, it wasn't until they had massive rates of unemployment and a big retiring population that they actually began to see the power of the business sector, the philanthropic sector. And I went back to Tokyo last year and met with that same philanthropic, I think it's the Japan Philanthropy Association, and there was something like 5,000 members. So you can see this huge bubble that's happening. So oftentimes governments are slower to catch up, and they're doing it as a result of an absence of a safety net.
Right. Kamran.
Well, I agree with what Susan says. Some places you can have cooperation. Some places you have to acknowledge, especially in many of emerging, developing countries, you have to acknowledge the presence of the government. If we are working in a refugee camp, if you are working in a school, we have to always go and meet Minister of Interior, Minister of Education, Minister of Communication, show our respects, but very politely also say, we hire our own people, we want to do everything ourselves, because this is one of the things we learned many times. At the beginning, we would go to a country and we would say, we want to select 20 schools or 50 schools and donate computers to them. Their immediate answer is, give us the money, we'll select the things, and we will do the work for you. And first time I was under a lot of pressure how to answer that in one of the countries I won't mention, till two of the teachers who were present in that meeting came outside, pulled me aside and said, don't ever give the money to our ministry, our schools would never see that. And you know, that you have to understand. But on the other token, on the positive side, many of the projects we have done, you know, we had this project we started in Sudan, in Darfur. We have started with only very small community center for women. In less than 3 years now, we have got US government, British government come and provide matching funds for us, and we have got 110 people working there on pretty significant project.
This I find really interesting. This may be the, you know, sort of the wrap-up takeaway, and I think it fits with everything each of you have said, that people, if you pardon the expression, like us, can be catalysts, willing to take risk, knowing that things fail, but they can become demonstration opportunities when, if they work, it's great if somebody else gets the credit. I had a classmate long time ago who started something in New York called the FiRe Institute. Nobody's heard of the FiRe Institute. It was liberal left students in the late 60s who developed as sociological research, what became known as the broken window approach to dealing with urban collapse. It was at the FiRe Institute, they worked out if you catch the kids who are jumping this turnstiles, guess what? You'll find that some of them are carrying guns. If you stop people from peeing in the corner, guess what? More people will walk there. If you clean up the paper in the park, people don't drop paper in the park. The fact is, you know, if you ask anybody in America who invented that, Rudy Giuliani, right? It was actually a group of liberal left ex-Princeton students in the late 60s at the FiRe Institute. So, you know, sometimes you have to figure that it's great to get things done, but it's amazing what you can accomplish if somebody else gets the credit.
One thing I would like to say to the whole audience, I think if you reach into your own hearts and close your eyes a little bit and dream about what you could do to change the world for the better, you will find out there are unbelievable things you could do that you never thought you could. And when you step forward, whether it is to go and volunteer in an existing organization, or as Bill says, do something that credit goes to whoever else, or you start your own organization, however way you do it, it's never too early, as Susan said, and you will get so much more back than what you give. You get 10 times more back. If I have anything to tell you, I would strongly recommend for you to step forward.
What a great note to end this discussion with. Thank you very much.